May 1943. Norfolk, Virginia. The harbor. The transport ship Cristobal churned through gray Atlantic waters toward the American coast, carrying its cargo of 2,400 German prisoners of war. Most were veterans of General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel's vaunted Afrika Korps, captured in Tunisia after the final collapse of Axis resistance in North Africa. They stood on deck in their sand-colored uniforms, watching the American shoreline emerge from the morning haze with a mixture of apprehension and contempt. These were hardened soldiers who had fought across North African deserts, men who believed in German superiority and ultimate victory. Oberfeldwebel Heinrich Böhmer, a veteran panzer crewman from the 21st Panzer Division, later recorded his expectations in a diary that would become evidence of transformation. We anticipated a nation weakened by internal division, crippled by economic depression, soft from years of decadent living. The Führer had told us America was a mongrel country of inferior races, incapable of sustained industrial effort or military discipline. We believed we would find chaos. What they found instead would shatter their mind forever. As the Cristobal entered Norfolk Harbor, the German prisoners pressed against the railings, staring in disbelief at what lay before them. The harbor bristled with warships, destroyers, cruisers, aircraft carriers in various stages of construction or repair. Massive cranes towered over dry docks where welders worked around the clock, their torches creating constellations of sparks against the steel hulls of Liberty ships being assembled at impossible speed. The harbor itself was larger than Hamburg, more active than any German port these veterans had ever seen. And this was just one American city among hundreds. But it was the lights that struck first and hardest. Norfolk glowed. Streetlights illuminated the waterfront. Buildings blazed with interior lighting visible through windows. Neon signs advertised restaurants and theaters. Cars moved through streets with their headlights at full brightness. After years of total blackout discipline in Europe, where a single candle glimpsed from outside could bring Allied bombers, the Americans conducted their war under full illumination, as if the Luftwaffe did not exist, as if they feared nothing. Gefreiter Otto Schulz, captured at Kasserine Pass, described the moment in a letter written years later. We thought they were mad. Any German city showing such lights would be obliterated within hours. Then we understood they had no fear of being bombed because they knew the Reich could never reach them. That realization was more demoralizing than any interrogation. The psychological impact of this first impression cannot be overstated. These men had left a Germany under constant aerial bombardment, where cities burned nightly under RAF Lancaster bomber raids, where civilians huddled in shelters while their homes were reduced to rubble. They had departed from Italian ports under cover of darkness, running the gauntlet of Allied submarines and aircraft. Every movement in the European theater was conducted under blackout discipline, in darkness and fear. America suffered none of this. America was untouched, prosperous, and confident enough to illuminate its cities as if war were an abstraction occurring somewhere far away. The prisoners were loaded onto trains for transport to processing centers and eventually to permanent camps across the interior. The rail journey itself became another revelation. The trains were clean, modern, well-maintained. American railway infrastructure stretched across a continent, connecting cities and towns in a vast network that dwarfed anything in Europe. The prisoners rode in passenger cars, not cattle cars, with cushioned seats and windows. Guards were professional but not brutal, offering water and basic rations during the journey. Through those windows, the German prisoners witnessed an America that contradicted every propaganda claim they had been fed for years. They passed through Virginia countryside where farms stood intact, unbombed and productive. They saw automobile traffic on highways, private citizens driving cars for personal use, while Germany had requisitioned every vehicle for military purposes. They observed small towns with neat houses, churches with intact steeples, factories producing goods in volumes that seemed impossible. Unteroffizier Franz Waber, a former machine gunner from the 90th Light Division, recorded in his diary, "The train journey across Virginia and into the Carolinas revealed a nation at peace despite being at war. No bomb craters, no ruins, no starving civilians. The American soldiers guarding us ate white bread and fresh meat. We received the same rations. In Germany, such food was reserved for officers. Here, common soldiers ate like kings. The scope of American mobilization became apparent even from a train window. They passed military bases that covered areas larger than entire German training grounds. They saw columns of trucks, new M35 2.5-ton cargo trucks, painted in olive drab, stretching for miles, more vehicles than the entire Wehrmacht possessed on the Eastern Front. They observed aircraft flying overhead in formations so large that counting became pointless. At every stop, American soldiers moved with casual efficiency, smoking cigarettes, drinking Coca-Cola, displaying a relaxed confidence that came from absolute certainty of victory. The contrast with German soldiers exhausted, undersupplied, fighting desperately on multiple fronts was stark and undeniable. These American guards were well-fed, well-equipped, and showed no sign of the grinding attrition that characterized life in the Wehrmacht by 1943. Some prisoners maintained their ideological certainty through these initial revelations. Hardened National Socialists dismissed what they saw as temporary, as window dressing meant to demoralize captured Germans. They clung to propaganda about secret weapons, the Wunderwaffen that would turn the tide, about America's racial divisions that would tear the nation apart, about the weakness of democracy and sustained conflict. But for many, the seeds of doubt had been planted during that first journey into America's interior. By the time the first transports reached camps in Texas, Oklahoma, and the Midwest in late spring of 1943, the psychological transformation had already begun. The prisoners had been in America for only days, but they had seen enough to recognize that German propaganda had not merely exaggerated but had been fundamentally, catastrophically wrong about American weakness. 371,683 German prisoners of war would pass through American prison camps between 1943 and 1946. Most would experience the same initial shock, the same dawning realization that they had been lied to about the nature of their enemy. The program that awaited them was not designed primarily through coercion or propaganda, but through exposure to an undeniable reality: America's overwhelming industrial might, agricultural abundance, and casual prosperity that even total war could not diminish. This was the arsenal of democracy, and it would prove more effective at defeating German ideology than any weapon forged in its factories. The ideology was pervasive, systematic, and seemingly unshakable. Every German soldier arriving in America had spent years immersed in National Socialist propaganda that painted a specific picture of the United States. Through newspapers, radio broadcasts, newsreels, and official indoctrination, the Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda under Joseph Goebbels had constructed an elaborate narrative of American weakness and decadence. The propaganda claimed America was a nation of racial mongrels weakened by the mixing of inferior peoples. Jews controlled the government and media, manipulating a gullible population. African Americans were treated as subhuman, creating internal divisions that would inevitably tear the nation apart. The economic narrative was equally damning in Third Reich ideology. America remained mired in the Great Depression. The propaganda insisted, with millions unemployed and starving. Industrial capacity was primitive compared to German engineering excellence. American workers were lazy, undisciplined, interested only in personal comfort rather than collective sacrifice. Military capacity was dismissed as negligible. A nation of shopkeepers and cowboys could never match the martial prowess of the German Wehrmacht. Lieutenant Kurt Vonnegut, a young officer captured in Tunisia, later wrote about his indoctrination. "We were taught that Americans were soft, corrupted by materialism and Jewish influence. They had no stomach for real war, no capacity for the kind of total commitment that National Socialism demanded. We believed that once American soldiers faced hardened German veterans in real combat, they would break and run." This worldview had been reinforced by selective use of images from America's Depression era. German newsreels showed breadlines from 1933, Dust Bowl refugees, labor violence, and racial conflicts. These images were presented as current reality rather than historical events from a decade earlier. The message was clear: America was a failed state, internally divided, economically collapsed, militarily impotent. Then the prisoners arrived and reality intruded with brutal force. The train journey across the American interior systematically demolished every propaganda claim they had absorbed. Gefreiter Hans Schmidt, transported from Norfolk to Camp Concordia in Kansas, documented the journey in letters that would be censored but eventually published after the war. Every mile revealed another lie. We passed through countryside untouched by war, with farms producing abundant crops using machinery we had never seen. Small towns had multiple automobiles, electricity, paved roads. The people looked well-fed and prosperous. Where was the depression? Where was the starvation? Where were the racial riots tearing the nation apart? The prisoners pressed their faces to train windows, counting cars on highways, observing the quality of American infrastructure, noting the sheer scale of industrial facilities they passed. They saw oil refineries in Texas covering areas larger than German cities. They observed grain elevators in Kansas that could store more wheat than their entire district in Germany produced in a year. They watched freight trains a mile long hauling raw materials and finished goods across a continent. The mechanization was particularly shocking to rural Germans. Many prisoners came from farming backgrounds where horses still pulled plows, where harvest was done largely by hand with minimal machinery. They witnessed American farms using John Deere Model B tractors, International Harvester combines, and mechanical equipment that allowed a single farmer to work hundreds of acres. A Bürgerfreiter Wilhelm Krebs, from a farming family in Bavaria, wrote in his diary, "One American farmer with his machines does the work of 50 German farmers. The tractors run day and night during harvest. The combines cut and thresh at a single operation. The grain is transported in trucks that would be considered luxury vehicles in Germany. These are not the primitive Americans of our propaganda. These are the most advanced farmers in the world." The racial narrative collapsed just as quickly under observation. Yes, segregation existed. The prisoners could see that African Americans faced discrimination in the South. But they also saw Black Americans driving automobiles, owning businesses, working in factories alongside white workers in the North. They saw a complexity that propaganda had reduced to simplistic caricature. More importantly, they saw African American soldiers serving as guards, wearing the same uniform as white soldiers, carrying the same weapons, treated with the same military respect. Unteroffizier Paul Fisher later reflected, "The propaganda told us that Negroes were treated as subhuman in America, yet we saw Black soldiers guarding us armed, disciplined, professional. We saw Black workers in factories earning wages that would make a German factory owner wealthy." Yes, there was discrimination, but it was nothing like what we had been told. And these people were certainly not the primitive savages of our propaganda. The economic reality was perhaps the most devastating revelation. These men came from a Germany under total war economy, where every resource was rationed, where civilians received barely enough food to survive, where consumer goods had disappeared entirely from stores. They arrived in an America where rationing existed but seemed almost voluntary by comparison. American soldiers had cigarettes, chocolate, and chewing gum, luxury items they traded casually or gave away to children. The prisoners received food rations that exceeded what German soldiers on the Eastern Front received. They ate white bread, fresh vegetables, meat at almost every meal. Feldwebel, Ernst Floater wrote home in a censored letter, "We eat better as prisoners in America than we ate as soldiers in the Wehrmacht. The guards throw away food we would consider luxuries. They complain about rationing that would seem like abundance to any German civilian." I am beginning to question everything we were told about American weakness. The propaganda had prepared them for a nation on the verge of collapse, torn by internal strife, unable to sustain a war effort. Instead, they found a continental power that had mobilized its industrial capacity while simultaneously maintaining civilian prosperity at levels Germany had never achieved even in peacetime. They found a nation that could wage global war on two fronts while its citizens still drove private automobiles, attended movies, and purchased consumer goods. The cognitive dissonance created psychological stress that manifested in different ways among different prisoners. Some doubled down on Third Reich ideology, claiming that what they saw was temporary, that Germany's secret weapons would soon turn the tide, that Jewish manipulation was hiding America's true weakness. These hardliners would remain resistant throughout their captivity, forming gangs within camps to enforce ideological conformity and punish those who questioned the regime. Others experienced profound disillusionment that bordered on trauma. Their entire worldview had been built on lies, and now those lies stood exposed. If the propaganda had lied about America, what else was false? These men began questioning everything they had been taught about the war, about National Socialism, about Germany's place in the world. Many simply observed in stunned silence, processing what they saw, comparing it to what they had been told, trying to reconcile the irreconcilable. Lieutenant Heinrich Meyer wrote in his diary, "We have been played for fools. The fatherland sent us to war against an enemy we did not understand, whose strength we had been taught to dismiss. Now we sit in prison camps in the heart of that enemy's territory, and we can see with our own eyes that Germany cannot win this war. The industrial capacity, the resources, the sheer scale of American power, it is beyond anything we were prepared to face." The journey into America's interior was just the beginning. The prisoners would spend months or years in camps scattered across 46 states, from Washington to Florida, from California to New York. They would work on farms, in forests, and factories supporting the war effort. They would witness American society from the inside, seeing its strengths and weaknesses, its contradictions and achievements. But the initial shock, that moment when Third Reich propaganda collided with American reality, remained the foundation of everything that followed. In those first days and weeks, watching through train windows as an undamaged, prosperous, powerful America rolled past, the first cracks appeared in the ideological armor that had made these men soldiers of the Reich. The transformation had begun, though most did not yet realize it. The arsenal of democracy was about to demonstrate its power not through weapons, but through simple, undeniable evidence of industrial and economic supremacy that no propaganda could explain away. The summer 1943. Willow Run, Michigan. The Impossible Factory. German prisoners assigned to work details near Detroit witnessed something that defied comprehension. The Ford Motor Company's Willow Run manufacturing plant produced one B-24 Liberator heavy bomber every 63 minutes, not 63 hours, not 63 days. Every 63 minutes, a complete four-engine bomber rolled off the assembly line ready for combat. The building itself was a monument to American industrial ambition, 3.5 million square feet under one roof, nearly a mile long. Henry Ford had applied automotive assembly line principles to aircraft production, with results that seemed impossible to German engineers, trained in traditional manufacturing methods. The factory employed 42,000 workers operating around the clock in 3 shifts. Raw materials entered one end of the building. Finished bombers emerged from the other. Obergefreiter Karl Schneider, a former Messerschmitt factory worker assigned to a labor detail near Willow Run, later wrote, "I worked in German aircraft production. We built planes by hand, with skilled craftsmen assembling each component individually. One bomber took us weeks. The Americans built them like automobiles on a moving assembly line. I watched through the fence as a new bomber appeared every hour. I did not believe Germany could win after seeing this." The mathematics of American production destroyed any remaining illusions about the war's outcome. In 1943 alone, American factories produced 85,938 aircraft. Germany, despite its vaunted engineering excellence, produced 25,527 aircraft that same year. The United States was outproducing Germany by more than 3-to-1 in aircraft alone. But aircraft were just the beginning of the revelation. Liberty ships, the EC-2 SC-1 cargo vessels designed for rapid mass production, emerged from American shipyards at a pace that made German naval construction look artisanal by comparison. 18 shipyards across the country built these 10,500-ton vessels using prefabricated sections and welding techniques that revolutionized maritime construction. The record stood at 4 days, 15 hours, and 30 minutes from keel laying to launch for the SS Robert E. Peary, constructed in Richmond, California in November 1942. By the time German prisoners arrived in America, Liberty ship production had become routine. The United States launched 3 cargo ships every single day throughout 1943. The entire German shipbuilding industry could not match the output of a single American shipyard. Feldwebel Otto Hermann, captured U-boat crewman, witnessed Liberty ship construction at a yard in Baltimore. "We sank these ships in the Atlantic. We celebrated each one as a victory. Now I see they build them faster than we could possibly sink them. For every ship we destroyed, 5 more were launched. The Kriegsmarine was fighting an enemy that could replace losses faster than we could inflict them. We were doomed from the beginning. Tank production followed the same pattern of overwhelming American advantage. The United States produced 88,410 tanks and self-propelled guns during the war. Germany produced 67,429, but the comparison missed the larger point. American factories produced these vehicles while simultaneously building aircraft, ships, trucks, weapons, ammunition, and maintaining civilian production that kept the home front prosperous. German prisoners working at Ford's River Rouge complex in Dearborn, Michigan saw the integrated industrial system that made such production possible. The Rouge facility contained its own steel mill, glass factory, and power plant. Raw materials arrived by rail and ship. Finished vehicles drove out under their own power. The complex employed 100,000 workers producing trucks, tanks, and engines in quantities that exceeded entire German industries. Lieutenant Werner Krauss, an engineering officer, toured American industrial facilities as part of a study program. The Americans have mastered vertical integration and mass production on a scale we never imagined possible. A single factory complex, like River Rouge, produces more in a week than our entire Ruhr Valley produces in a month. Their workers are not more skilled than ours. They are better organized, better equipped, and working with machinery that multiplies their productivity 100-fold. The prisoners learned that American war production was just reaching peak capacity in 1943. The factories they witnessed were recently built or converted from civilian production. Within 2 years of Pearl Harbor, the United States had constructed the largest military-industrial complex in human history, and it was still growing, still accelerating, still increasing output month by month. The psychological impact on German prisoners cannot be overstated. These were men who had believed in German technical superiority, who had been taught that German engineering and craftsmanship represented the pinnacle of industrial achievement. They discovered instead that German methods, skilled craftsmen building quality products individually, could not compete with American methods of mass production, standardization, and industrial organization. Unteroffizier Franz Weber summarized what many prisoners felt. "We built beautiful machines, one at a time, with pride in craftsmanship. The Americans built adequate machines by the tens of thousands. They did not need each tank to be perfect. They needed enough tanks to overwhelm us through sheer numbers. And they had those numbers. They had more tanks, more planes, more ships, more everything than we could possibly destroy. Quality cannot defeat quantity when the quantity is this overwhelming." Some prisoners maintained their ideological certainty by focusing on German technological advantages: the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter, the Type 21 U-boat, the Tiger tank's superior armor and firepower. But even these hardliners could not ignore the fundamental economic reality. Germany's advanced weapons were produced in small numbers. America's adequate weapons were produced in war-winning quantities. The revelation was complete and devastating. The arsenal of democracy was not propaganda, it was observable fact. American industrial capacity exceeded German capacity by orders of magnitude. The outcome of the war had been determined before most of these prisoners had even been captured. The only question remaining was how long Germany would continue fighting a war it had already lost. September 1943, Kansas. The endless grain. German prisoners stepped off trains into the American Midwest and encountered an agricultural landscape that challenged every assumption about farming, land use, and food production. The Great Plains stretched to the horizon in every direction, flat, fertile, and farmed on a scale that made European agriculture look like gardening. Obergefreiter Wilhelm Krebs, from a small farming village in Bavaria, described his first impression. "My family's farm was 30 acres. We thought ourselves prosperous. In Kansas, I was assigned to a farm of 6,000 acres, larger than my entire village's farmland combined. One family operated this vast estate, with machinery I had never imagined existed. The mechanization was beyond anything these rural Germans had experienced. International Harvester combines moved through wheat fields, cutting and threshing in a single operation at speeds that left German prisoners watching in amazement. John Deere Model B tractors pulled gang plows that turned 12 furrows simultaneously, work that would require a dozen horses and multiple men in Germany. Grain trucks hauled tons of wheat to elevators in a single trip. The American farmer operated as an industrial manager rather than a peasant laborer. He used machinery worth more than most German farms, managed operations on a scale that would qualify as an estate in Europe, and produced food in quantities that fed armies overseas while maintaining abundance at home. Feldwebel Ernst Bauer worked harvest season on a wheat farm in Nebraska and recorded the experience in letters home. One American farmer with his machines produces more wheat than my entire district in Germany. The harvest takes days instead of months. The machinery never tires. The grain is loaded mechanically, transported mechanically, stored in elevators 10 stories tall. This is not farming, this is industrial food production. The productivity per acre was equally shocking to German agricultural workers. American farms used hybrid seeds, chemical fertilizers, and scientific crop rotation that increased yields far beyond what traditional European methods achieved. The Kansas wheat field produced 40 bushels per acre. A comparable German field produced 20 bushels per acre. American agriculture was twice as efficient while using a fraction of the labor. But productivity was only part of the revelation. The American farmer's standard of living destroyed German propaganda about rural American poverty. Gefreiter Hans Müller, assigned to a dairy farm in Wisconsin, wrote in his diary, "The farmer I work for lives better than any landowner in Germany. His house has electricity, indoor plumbing, a telephone, and a radio. He owns 3 automobiles, one for work, one for his wife, one for his son. His children attend high school in town. His barn is larger and better equipped than most German factories. This man considers himself middle class, not wealthy." If this is poverty, then Germany has no prosperity. The food abundance was almost obscene compared to wartime rationing in Germany. Prisoners working on American farms ate 3 full meals daily: eggs and bacon for breakfast, meat sandwiches for lunch, roast chicken or beef for dinner. Fresh vegetables came from the farm. Milk was unlimited. The German civilians these men had left behind subsisted on black bread and potatoes, with meat once a week if lucky. Unteroffizier Karl Fischer later reflected, "We ate better as prisoners working on American farms than we ever ate as soldiers in the Wehrmacht. The farm family I worked for threw away more food in a week than my family in Germany saw in a month. Their pigs ate better than German civilians. The abundance was incomprehensible." The livestock operations revealed another dimension of American agricultural superiority. Cattle ranches in Texas and Montana covered areas larger than German provinces. Feedlots fattened thousands of cattle simultaneously using mechanized feeding systems and scientific nutrition. Dairy operations milked hundreds of cows using mechanical milking machines connected to refrigerated storage tanks. American animal husbandry was industrialized agriculture that bore no resemblance to European farming traditions. Obergefreiter Werner Schmidt, working on a cattle ranch in Montana, described the scale. The ranch covered 200,000 acres. They counted their cattle in thousands, not dozens. Cowboys used trucks and horses to manage herds that stretched across the horizon. The ranch owner was not nobility. He was a businessman who happened to raise cattle on land the size of a German duchy. The prisoners also observed American agricultural education and scientific farming that explained the productivity gap. County agricultural agents provided free advice to farmers. State universities conducted research and distributed findings. Farm cooperatives shared equipment and knowledge. The entire system was designed to maximize production through education, technology, and cooperation rather than tradition and manual labor. Lieutenant Heinrich Braun, an agricultural officer before the war, studied American farming methods. German agriculture relies on centuries of tradition and intensive hand labor. American agriculture relies on machinery, science, and capital investment. A German farmer works harder. An American farmer works smarter. The American produces 5 times more food, with 1/5 the labor. This efficiency explains why America can feed its population, its military, and much of the Allied world simultaneously. The social implications were equally significant for prisoners from German rural backgrounds. In Germany, farmers were peasants, respected for feeding the nation, but socially inferior to urban professionals and landowners. In America, successful farmers were middle-class businessmen who sent their children to university, participated in local government, and lived with modern conveniences that urban Germans considered luxuries. Feldwebel Otto Zimmermann, from a farming family in Saxony, wrote, "The American farmer is not a peasant. He is educated, prosperous, and respected. He uses technology and business methods we associate with industry. His children do not dream of escaping the farm. Many plan to return after university to expand the family operation. Farming in America is not a hardship but an opportunity." The psychological impact of witnessing American agricultural abundance was profound for prisoners who came from rural backgrounds or had been told that America's vast territory was inefficiently used. They saw instead the most productive agricultural system in human history, one that combined vast land resources with mechanical efficiency and scientific methods to produce food in quantities that made Germany's agricultural output look subsistence level by comparison. The revelation extended beyond military implications. These prisoners understood that America's agricultural supremacy meant the home front would never starve, morale would never collapse from hunger, and the industrial workforce would remain well-fed and productive regardless of how long the war continued. Germany was fighting an enemy that could feed itself and its allies indefinitely, while German civilians grew increasingly malnourished. The war could not be won against such abundance. October 1943, Camp Concordia, Kansas. The paradox of captivity. German prisoners arrived at camps across America expecting brutality, deprivation, and the harsh treatment that characterized captivity on the Eastern Front. What they encountered instead was adherence to the Geneva Conventions so strict it bordered on incomprehensible. 3 meals daily, heated barracks, medical care, recreational activities, and treatment that exceeded what many had received as soldiers in the Wehrmacht. Camp Concordia, built on the Kansas prairie to house 4,000 prisoners, exemplified the American approach to POW management. The camp occupied 257 acres surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers, but the interior resembled a small orderly town rather than a prison. Wooden barracks provided heated shelter. A hospital staffed by captured German doctors and American medical personnel treated illness and injury. Recreation halls offered space for sports, music, and entertainment. The camp even had a canteen where prisoners could purchase toiletries, tobacco, and snacks with scrip earned from labor. Gefreiter Otto Becker, captured at Kasserine Pass, described his arrival at Concordia. "We expected concentration camp conditions, starvation, beatings, forced labor until death. Instead, we received beds with mattresses, 3 hot meals daily, and treatment according to international law." The contrast with how we treated Russian prisoners was so stark that many of us felt ashamed. The Americans fought us as enemies but treated us as human beings. The food alone represented a shocking departure from German military rations. Breakfast consisted of oatmeal or eggs, toast with butter and jam, coffee with real sugar and cream. Lunch brought sandwiches made with white bread, fresh vegetables, and meat. Dinner featured roast chicken, beef, or pork with potatoes and vegetables, plus dessert cake, pie, or pudding, made with ingredients that had disappeared from German stores years earlier. The caloric intake exceeded 2,800 calories daily, more than German soldiers on the Eastern Front received and substantially more than German civilians under wartime rationing. Feldwebel Ernst Wagner wrote in his diary, "We are prisoners, yet we eat better than we did as soldiers, better than our families eat at home. The American guards receive identical rations. There is no distinction between captor and captive at meals. This equality is foreign to German military tradition, where officers dine separately and better than enlisted men. Here a private and a colonel receive the same food, the same treatment under regulations." Medical care followed the same pattern of competent, humane treatment that contradicted German expectations. Camp hospitals had trained medical staff, adequate supplies of medications and surgical equipment, and operating rooms that could handle emergencies. Sick prisoners received the same medical treatment as American soldiers. Dental care was provided. Mental health was monitored, with prisoners showing signs of depression or combat fatigue receiving counseling. Dr. Hans Richter, a captured Wehrmacht medical officer who worked in the Camp Alva Hospital in Oklahoma, later reflected, "The Americans treated medicine as a right, not a privilege. Every prisoner received care regardless of rank or circumstances. We had sulfa drugs, pain medications, and surgical supplies that German field hospitals lacked. I performed surgeries on prisoners that would have been impossible in Germany due to supply shortages. The irony was bitter. Captured Germans received better medical care than German soldiers fighting on the front. The recreational opportunities seemed absurd to men who expected imprisonment to mean suffering. Camps organized soccer leagues, with teams representing different barracks competing in tournaments that drew enthusiastic crowds of fellow prisoners. Musical instruments were provided, and orchestras formed to give concerts. Theatrical troupes staged German-language plays and variety shows. Art supplies allowed prisoners to paint and draw. Libraries stocked thousands of books in German classics, technical manuals, current periodicals. Camp newspapers published in German kept prisoners informed about world events, though heavily censored to remove German propaganda. The most famous, Der Ruf, The Call, published at camps in the Southwest, became a forum for intellectual discussion and eventually a vehicle for democratic re-education. Obergefreiter Franz Weber wrote, "We have more leisure time and cultural activities as prisoners than we had as soldiers. There are concerts, plays, soccer matches, art classes. The Americans encourage these activities, believing that occupied prisoners cause less trouble than bored ones. They are correct. But the effect is also to show us a different way that even in captivity, human dignity and culture can be maintained." Religious freedom was guaranteed and respected in ways that surprised prisoners from a totalitarian state. Catholic and Protestant chaplains held regular services. Prisoners could attend Mass, receive sacraments, and observe religious holidays without interference. Jewish prisoners, though rare among the POWs, were protected from anti-Semitic violence by American guards who enforced strict rules against harassment. The chaplains became important figures in many prisoners' lives, offering spiritual counsel and often serving as intermediaries between prisoners and camp authorities. The escape rate revealed the fundamental success of the American POW system. Only 0.6% of German prisoners attempted escape during their captivity. This statistic was extraordinary compared to other POW populations and other conflicts. The low escape rate reflected not just the difficulty of escaping in the middle of America, but also the recognition that life in the camps was tolerable, that the war was being lost anyway, and that attempting escape risked being shot while gaining nothing. Lieutenant Werner Krauss explained the calculation, "Where would we go if we escaped? We are thousands of miles from Germany, surrounded by a continent controlled by our enemies. We would be caught within days and returned to camp, possibly losing privileges. And for what? To return to a Germany being bombed daily, where civilians starve and cities burn." Many of us realized we were safer and better fed as prisoners in America than we would be as free men in Germany. The camp structure maintained German military hierarchy, which created both order and problems. Senior German officers commanded within the camps, maintaining discipline and organization among prisoners. This preserved a military structure but also allowed hardline adherents of the regime to dominate and intimidate prisoners who questioned the ideology or cooperated too enthusiastically with American re-education efforts. Violence between prisoners, true believers beating those they considered traitors, occurred in several camps and required American intervention. The Americans implemented a screening process to separate fanatics from moderates, eventually creating special camps for unrepentant supporters of the regime and other camps for prisoners open to re-education. This segregation proved crucial to the success of the broader program.